The 10 most over-engineered Chevys ever made. Have you ever looked at a car and thought, did they really need to make it this complex? Well, buckle up, because we are about to explore the wildest moments in automotive history when brilliant engineers simply could not help themselves. This is not about luxury. This is not about speed alone. These are mobile monuments to what happens when genius minds decide that simple solutions are for quitters. Today, we are counting down 10 of the most over-engineered cars ever built, handpicked by real muscle car fans who know obsession when they see it. And trust me, some of these machines will make you ask, what were they smoking in that design meeting? If you love diving deep into the madness of car engineering, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because what is coming next might just change the way you look at your own ride. (1996) Chevrolet Impala SS. In 1996, Chevrolet looked at the average full-size sedan and said, what if we gave it PTSD from chasing criminals? Enter the Impala SS, a car that looked like your uncle's grocery getter, but secretly trained in high-speed pursuits. Under the hood, a Corvette-sourced LT1 5.7-liter V8 detuned slightly to 260 horsepower, just enough to not scare Grandma, but still enough to leave 2 long stripes of regret on the pavement. It rode on the same 9C1 police package as the Caprice Cruisers, complete with heavy-duty, everything suspension brakes, cooling system, and a limited slip differential that said, I've seen things. But Chevy didn't want to scare suburban dads, so they dressed it up. Blacked-out trim, 17-inch 5-spoke wheels, and no chrome, because chrome is for people who pay taxes. Even the door handles were black. The only visible badge, a tiny Impala deer sprinting like it just heard a siren. Inside, it whispered performance through bucket seats and analog gauges large enough to be read during a car chase. The suspension was stiffer, but still soft enough to get you to bingo night. And if you opened the hood, you'd notice something weird: extra room. That's because GM originally planned a bigger engine, then forgot. Or chickened out. Hard to say. It only lasted 3 years. Maybe because it confused people. A muscle car disguised as a family sedan. It was like buying a Labrador and realizing it speaks Russian. And yes, in our fan poll, this undercover street bruiser took the top spot. Because apparently, people love their horsepower served with a side of dad bod. All right, time for a quick poll. Do you think Chevy went too far with these builds, or just far enough? Tell us below. 1967 Corvette L88. In 1967, GM decided to build a Corvette so powerful it came with a built-in panic button, metaphorically, of course. They called it the L88. Officially, it was rated at 430 horsepower at 5,200 RPM. But let's be honest, that number was pure theater. With an aluminum head, 427 cubic inch big block solid lifters, a 12.5:1 compression ratio, and a Holley 850 CFM 4-barrel carb on top of an aluminum intake, real output danced well above 550 horsepower, easily touching 560-plus horsepower when tuned. But here's where it gets delightfully stupid. GM didn't want regular folks buying this car, not because it wasn't amazing, but because it was too amazing. So they sabotaged it on purpose. No radio, no heater, no air conditioning. Want a fan shroud? Nope. What about a choke? Forget it. It was built to run flat out on 103-octane race fuel, not sit in mall parking lots sipping 87. The M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed manual transmission was bolted in to take the abuse. The rear axle ratios could be ordered as low as 4.56:1, basically turning it into a drag strip demon with plates. GM's own engineers warned dealers not to sell it to civilians, but a few slipped through. In total, only 20 units were built in 1967, all practically hand-delivered to SCCA and NHRA racers under the table. Why the secrecy? Because the L88 was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. It embarrassed the regular 427 Corvette. It threatened internal Corvette politics, and it risked pulling GM into the crosshairs of rising federal regulations on emissions and insurance restrictions on high-horsepower cars. Driving an L88 wasn't just exhilarating, it was dangerous, inconvenient, and completely irrational. But that's exactly why people loved it. You didn't own an L88, you survived it. And yes, in our fan poll, the L88 didn't just make the list, it set the gold standard. Because when GM tried to bury it, enthusiasts dug it up and made it legend. (1971) Corvette ZR2. The ZR1 is the name people drop to sound impressive. The ZR2, that's the one GM engineers whisper about after 3 beers and a confidentiality waiver. Only 12 were built, technically more than a prototype, but just barely. At its core is the LS6 454 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 425 horsepower, which is adorable considering it probably made closer to 500 with the right combination of air attitude and octane. This wasn't so much an engine as it was a controlled detonation in a fiberglass shell. The carb, a Holley 850 CFM4 barrel, basically a fuel funnel for chaos. The gearbox was a Monte M22 rock crusher, named after what it sounds like when you shift it. Forget smooth. Shifting this thing was more of a full-body commitment than a driving action. Want creature comforts, no radio, no AC, not even a fan shroud. Just heat vibration and horsepower-induced regret. It had 4-wheel disc brakes and independent suspension, which sounds fancy until you remember the car's primary function was launching itself into the horizon at full throttle. And it did that well, very well, as long as you didn't mind the noise, the fuel bill, or explaining to your neighbors why your garage smells like burnt rubber and broken dreams. Driving the ZR2 felt like strapping yourself to a fistfight. No rules, no mercy, just combustion and chaos. The ZR2 wasn't built for comfort or convenience or even clarity. It was built because someone at GM said, "Let's see how far we can go," before legal says stop. Driving one is loud, violent, uncomfortable, and unforgettable, which is probably why they only made 12. 1987 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS Aerocoupe. In 1987, Chevrolet set out to do something bold and cheat aerodynamics the legal way. The result was the Monte Carlo SS Aerocoupe, a car that looked like someone had taken a regular Monte and quietly pushed the rear glass in with a firm hand and a wind tunnel. Under the hood was a 305 cubic inch high-output V8, churning out a tire-shredding 180 horsepower, assuming you were going downhill with a tailwind. But horsepower wasn't the point. The Aerocoupe was built for speed, not your speed, but NASCAR's. That weirdly angled rear window was engineered to reduce drag on the oval, helping GM drivers shave off fractions of seconds that corporate sponsors could sell as innovation. Beneath it all was a body-on-frame chassis, paired with the F41 suspension, which meant it cornered like a couch bolted to a trampoline. Inside, buyers had the thrilling choice of manual or power windows, depending on how much they trusted electricity in the 80s. And if you were brave, you could opt for T-tops, which were notorious for leaking and made every rainstorm a roulette of water damage. Only around 6,052 units were ever made. It was a homologation special created solely to satisfy NASCAR's requirement that race cars be based on production models. Rumor has it, GM deliberately underbuilt the Aerocoupe to keep it off showroom floors. Some say it was to prevent internal cannibalization because the car was too focused, too purpose-built, and maybe even faster on track than the Corvette under the right hands. Yet in our fan poll, this sleek, forgotten wind cheater clawed its way into the top 10. Because nothing screams American ingenuity like gaming the rule book with style. (1970) Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454-6. The Chevelle SS LS6 wasn't built for subtlety. It was built for war, specifically a war against traction fuel economy and the very concept of mechanical restraint. If the Mercedes W140 was overbuilt luxury, the LS6 was overkill in a muscle car tuxedo. A brute designed just before the EPA showed up with rules and a clipboard. At its core was the LS6 454 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 450 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and a monstrous 500 pound-feet of torque at just 3,600 RPM. The 11.2 5-to-1 compression ratio meant it drank premium fuel like a linebacker downs Gatorade, fast, frequent, and without apology. Air was force-fed into the beast via a cowl induction hood, while a Holley 4-barrel carburetor forged pistons and solid lifter cam ensured every combustion cycle felt like a small earthquake. The Monte M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed transmission was less a gearbox and more a concrete mixer with an attitude problem. Every shift was loud, every gear change a small mechanical rebellion. Pair that with a 410 rear axle, and this thing launched from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6 seconds, storming the quarter mile in 13.2 to 13.7 seconds, assuming you could get the tires to last that long. Tire smoke wasn't an occasional byproduct, it was a lifestyle. Handling, let's not pretend. This car was designed to go straight violently and leave long black signatures on the road as a thank you note. Comfort features included an AM radio, a steering wheel that shook when angry, and the glorious absence of anything that might soften the experience. Today, surviving LS6 models exist in one of two states, either pampered in climate-controlled garages by men who polish chrome with toothbrushes, or locked away because local ordinances classified them as rolling noise violations. The 1970 Chevelle LS6 is what happens when engineers ask how much is too much, and management replies, let's find out. (1966) Chevrolet Biscayne 427 L72. The 1966 Biscayne 427 L72 was Chevrolet's version of a poker face. No chrome, no stripes, no bragging, just a whisper on the fender that read 427 Turbojet. It was the automotive equivalent of showing up to a drag race in a church suit and pulling a crowbar out of your sleeve. At its core was the L72 427 cubic inch V8, cranking out 425 horsepower, which was plenty for a car that weighed just under 2 tons and didn't waste a single ounce on frills. There was no radio, no power windows, not even a hint of wood grain. It was the purest sleeper Chevrolet ever built a muscle car dressed like a DMV employee. Forget disc brakes. The Biscayne came with 4-wheel drums, meaning stopping was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. But it didn't matter. The rear tires were too busy spinning to worry about traction anyway. Every launch was an act of tire sacrifice, and every shift came with a dose of panic, mostly for the guy in the lane next to you, usually driving something with way more badges and way less torque. There were no creature comforts, no leather, just bench seats, a steel dashboard, and horsepower with a chip on its shoulder. And that's exactly why it worked. The 427 Biscayne didn't win hearts in showrooms. It broke them at stoplights. And in our fan poll, it earned respect the hard way by embarrassing cars that cost twice as much, while looking like a car your uncle drove to work at the paper mill. It may have looked half asleep, but hit the gas, and suddenly everyone's wide awake. (1965) Chevrolet Malibu SS Z16. Before the Chevelle SS became a household name, GM quietly dropped a bombshell under the radar. The 1965 Malibu SS Z16. On the surface, it looked like a regular mid-size coupe with a bit of chrome and muscle tone. But under the skin, it was a prototype in a production suit, a limited-run science project that somehow got released to the public. Only 201 units were ever built. One of them, a convertible, which leaves 200.5 cars, give or take. That exclusivity wasn't just a badge of honor. It was a clue. Because this car wasn't about volume. It was about what GM could get away with before the insurance companies and emissions cops started reading spec sheets. It packed a 396 cubic inch L37 V8, good for 375 horsepower, back when that number actually meant something. The engine sat inside a chassis borrowed from the convertible version, which made it heavier but also stiffer, perfect for handling all that unexpected power. A Monte 4-speed manual transmission and 3.73 rear axle meant it could launch hard bark into second and disappear by third. This wasn't a sales strategy. It was an engineering accident that made it out of the test garage. As one old-timer at the shop put it, they built it as a test, then realized it was too good to keep locked up. So they slapped on a VIN and said, "Screw it, sell it." And just like that, the Z16 became legend. Not because everyone had one, but because almost no one did. (1970) Chevrolet Corvette LT1. The LT1 Corvette was born when GM's engineers collectively decided that RPM was a personality trait. Introduced at the peak of the muscle car wars, the LT1 wasn't the most powerful Corvette ever made, but it was the one that made your neighbors wake up and smile. The LT1 engine was a 350 cubic inch small block V8 that revved to 6,500 RPM, producing 370 horsepower and 380 pound-feet of torque. With no turbo, no supercharger, just solid lifters, 11.0 to 1 compression, and a carburetor that always seemed hungry. It ran a Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel that didn't whisper. It howled. These numbers sound modest today. But in 1970, when most American V8s wheezed out at 4,800 RPM, the LT1 didn't drive. It screamed. It spun so fast, so freely, that even the tack needle struggled to keep up. No rev limiter, just a mechanical scream that only stopped when your foot did. There was no air conditioning, no automatic transmission. If you wanted to drive this car, you had to sweat for it. It came only with a Monte M21-4 speed-a clutch that doubled as a leg workout and 0 driver aids besides your spine. Independent suspension on all 4 corners, 4-wheel disc brakes, and a curb weight around 3,200 pounds meant the LT1 didn't corner. It attacked. You didn't glide through turns, you lunged, you prayed, you survived, and if you did, you were hooked for life. The LT1 was never designed to sell in massive numbers. It was built to please the engineers, the ones who believed redline was religion, and every wide-open throttle pull was a hymn in cast iron. On one glorious day in 1970, someone at GM looked at the blueprints and said, "We don't need to build this, but we need to hear it." (1962) Chevrolet Bel Air 409 Bubbletop. The Bel Air 409 didn't start out to break world records. It simply set out to shock every stoplight racer in America. GM didn't need to spend billions of dollars. They only needed two numbers, 409 and 409. One for cubic inches, the other for horsepower. Not more, not less. Just precise. To hit that mark, Chevrolet gave this Bel Air a 409 cubic inch big block V8 fitted with twin 4-barrel carburetors and naturally a 4-speed manual transmission. It came with positraction rear end, the kind that makes sure your rear tires never stop spinning, even when maybe they should. On paper, it looked like a full-size family coupe, but on the drag strip, it was a time-warping execution device. The famous Bubbletop roofline with its dramatic curved rear glass wasn't just a styling flex. It helped slice the air, not for fuel economy, but to shove wind in the opponent's face. The result, quarter-mile runs under 13 seconds on slicks. In 1962, when most sedans were still figuring out how to mount seat belts, no disc brakes, no electronics, no ABS, no ESP, just raw momentum, and blind trust in your reflexes. Because once you punched the throttle, you didn't stop. You waited for the world to stop you. Like one old guy at the garage once said, "This car doesn't go out for breakfast. It eats the other guys." That 409 wasn't made to cruise. It was made to humiliate people in nicer cars. They called it a grandpa's wedding car. But after that first launch, even the bride wanted out. 1978, Chevrolet Corvette Pace Car L82. Before the L82, most special edition cars were just regular rides with fancy stickers. But someone at Chevrolet decided, let's give this one a little muscle, just enough to keep the pose honest. The result was a Corvette that wasn't the fastest on the street, but looked like it should be, and surprisingly didn't embarrass itself when pushed. Let's start with the engine. The L82 was a 350 cubic inch V8 pushing out 220 horsepower, the highest Chevy offered in 1978. It wasn't a world beater, but it was respectable at a time when emissions and insurance regulations had neutered most performance cars. The cowl induction hood was more than show. It helped breathe in some extra power. And the 4-speed manual, if you picked it right, kept things lively. But the real show was the looks. Gloss black over silver with the iconic Indy 500 Pace Car decals plastered down the flanks. Inside, silver leather mirrored dash bezels, and even a futuristic digital speedometer. It was the late 70s. This was high-tech wizardry for a production car. Chevy claimed this car could pace a race, but let's be honest, it was built to pace parking lots and flex at stoplights. And it did both with flair. It was flashy. It was loud, and yet when you floored it, the L82 didn't freeze in panic. It ran. Not like a beast, but like a gym teacher in his 40s still got some legs when it counts. Each car got its own numbered plaque, adding to the collectability. They only made 6,502 of them. And while many ended up in garages as untouched time capsules, those who drove them discovered a truth. The 1978 Pace car wasn't just for posing. It had just enough under the hood to make the stickers believable. So what did we learn from these 10 mechanical masterpieces? That sometimes when you give engineers unlimited time, unlimited budget, and zero adult supervision, you don't just get a car, you get a legend. Whether it's gold-lined engine bays, digital tachometers that spin faster than your brain, or a sleeper V8 wrapped in Grandma's grocery getter. Each of these rides proves that too much can sometimes be just right. These weren't just vehicles, they were obsessions. Fan-voted icons that remind us how far car culture can go when passion beats practicality. Now it's your turn. Which car on this list blew your mind the most? Or did we miss your personal favorite overbuilt monster? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to smash that like button, share with your fellow gearheads, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the craziest corners of automotive history. Because for us, fans, too much is never enough.